Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. I am back with another subgenre deep dive, this time talking about the adventure thriller. These are your more action packed spy, political, travel thrillers, very different from your standard traditional mystery novel, and a subgenre that I think is probably not as popular with the regular audience of this channel. Obviously, these are very popular, but I do often find readers of adventure thrillers usually are a separate audience from the traditional mysteries, but we'll get into that. And before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel, and there are no spoilers in this video. First, we have to answer the question, what is an adventure thriller? Well, like every other subgenre, there are blurred lines a bit here. Not every adventure thriller is a mystery. Take The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. That is an adventure thriller, but it is not a mystery. A mystery adventure thriller typically has some kind of named but invisible villain that has to be unmasked and revealed. It's very like Scooby-Doo-esque in a way. There has to be something unknown that has to be solved. And throughout this video, I'll probably use The Secret Adversary by Agatha Christie as an example, because I suspect that's one everyone knows. I won't be spoiling it, but take The Secret Adversary. You have the main mystery to be solved is, who is Mr. Brown? Who is this agent threatening a revolution and causing all of this chaos? Often adventure thriller villains have sort of like vague goals that are not clearly defined. There usually is a murder in an adventure thriller, but that murder or murderers is usually like one event that's part of a larger chain of villainous acts. Mr. Brown murders Mrs. Vandermeyer, but the main problem in The Secret Adversary isn't who killed Mrs. Vandermeyer. The traditional murder mystery is usually there, and of course, mystery adventure thrillers have to abide by the rules of detective fiction. They have to be solvable. I will say, typically, I think there aren't a lot of clues, at least not like puzzle deductions going on in adventure thrillers. I think that is a key element separating the thriller from the hard-boiled. There needs to be clues for sure, but they are certainly less puzzle-like. Someone commented on a previous video of mine a very good, pithy definition here. Mystery novels are concerned with what happened in the past, while adventure thrillers are concerned with what is going to happen in the future. The stakes in an adventure thriller are incredibly high. Failure to catch the criminal will lead to devastating societal changes, a revolution, someone seizing power they shouldn't have, wrecking a national or world economy, mass murder. In a whodunit, if the murderer is not caught, justice is not served, but society does not collapse. Life goes on. And because the stakes are so high, we often have adventure thrillers set during times of high stakes. World War I, World War II, the immediate aftermaths of those wars when stability is an issue. Adventure thrillers are often political in tone, especially, I would argue, in the golden age where, the possible targeted audience is all on the same side. 99% of readers would be cheering on Tommy and Tuppence to stop the Bolsheviks or cheering Albert Campion to stop the Nazis. I think today political adventure thrillers are more limiting and polarizing. Golden Age authors knew to be politically popular or politically vague. If you'll notice, when there are political elements, they are either like generic, like issues of patriotism, or just vaguely defined. The politician doesn't have a stated party. You have fictional prime ministers and presidents. You even have fictional countries. Adventure thrillers have the highest stakes of any mystery novel. The whodunits and the cozies, both with an S and a Z, have intimate personal stakes. The hard-boiled is the next ring out, having higher stakes involving career criminals and drugs and things like that. But the adventure thrillers have even higher stakes. The fate of nations is at stake. What kinds of things do we see in an adventure thriller? Well, as the name states, there's a lot of adventure, and with that, I would say action and physical excitement, an adrenaline rush. And these things need to be a constant presence throughout the novel, not just a one-off incident. Take Clouds of Witness by Dorothy Sayers, which has this ridiculous passage at the end where Lord Peter flies home across the Atlantic. Keeping in mind, this is pre Lindbergh's nonstop flight, and it's all very daring and daring do, but it's just a one time thing. It's not a feature of the novel. This action packed adventure needs to be a constant presence throughout the novel, and this would include things like multiple chase scenes, explosions, car races, large scale heists, perhaps international traveling or spies. Definitely, I would say an adventure thriller involves some kind of travel. The entirety of the novel is not set in the same vicinity. Even something like, Why Didn't They Ask Evans involves like traveling to different places, even within the same nation. The actions and the characters are constantly on the move. They are constantly doing something, and often they don't know what exactly they should be doing, but because the situation they are in is atypical, there are no blueprints to follow. They just do things. They run around chaotically. There's no like Hercule Poirot sitting back and using his gray cells. There's no Miss Marple coming up with village parallels. It's action, action, action. Any thinking or deduction being done is either retrospective, sort of after the fact, or like the quick on your feet type. We tend to see a lot of kidnappings, people held hostage, or people disappearing. Again, this should be a main feature or a long lasting plot line. Next week's video is a review of the Spanish Cape Mystery by Ellery Queen, which begins with a kidnapping, but it's resolved pretty quickly so that it does not make it an adventure thriller. I personally find, and this is definitely not a requirement because more traditional mysteries have this as well, but I find it's not an adventure thriller unless someone gets conked on the head, passes out, or either has like amnesia or pretends to have amnesia. It's sort of a staple in like a comedic way. And that is potentially another element of the adventure thriller. They do tend to be less serious in tone than traditional mysteries, and this is to cut through the intensity of the situation. Adventure thrillers tend to be set in very dark times, very high stakes. I would say probably nowadays adventure thrillers are less comedic and more sarcastic. I do find modern day thrillers to be a bit frivolous, not in the same way as like a Tommy and Tuppence novel is. I'm thinking of like something like Jack Reacher by Lee Child, where I would say the intensity is cut up by sarcasm and by irony more so than just like outright humor, and just like how like ridiculous some of the plots are. Like no one is getting hit on the head in a Jack Reacher novel, for laughs at least. I would say there is more romance going on today to break up that tension. Not that there wasn't romance in like Trader's Purse or Secret Adversary, but today we do have more, I would say, like overtly sexual, flirtatious content to break up the seriousness. Our hero in an adventure thriller probably going to have sex at some point during the novel, or whether it's a male or a female protagonist. I would also potentially argue that adventure thrillers today are more violent and graphic, and it seems strange to say, but I would argue that violence also breaks up the intensity. It can be harrowing, but sometimes I think too much violence becomes sort of ridiculous on its own. I personally never find adventure thrillers too intense. I think Golden Age ones are sort of frivolous and not to be taken too seriously, whereas the more modern ones are really just so overdramatic I can't take them seriously. They get a bit ridiculous and farcical, almost always unintentional too. And I could be wrong here, but I would suspect a lot of thriller writers actually think their works are more profound and serious than the audience takes them. I just find them completely over the top, almost a fantasy. Not necessarily fantasy, but because adventure thrillers, are mysteries that must follow the rules of detective fiction. But I would also say I think this subgenre is probably the one I'm most willing to let some of the rules slide. I'm willing to accept more outrageous things from an adventure thriller than I am from like a whodunit. I just think the nature of an adventure thriller requires such. And adventure thriller mysteries have a very specific type of villain. The villain is almost a super villain, one whose evil knows no bounds. In a traditional mystery novel, the murderer has a goal. They murder a person or multiple people to achieve that goal, and then they're done. They're not continuing on with like world domination. in an adventure thriller, our main villain, our mastermind, has no bounds. There is nothing he or she won't do. They will murder anyone, they will steal anyone, they will ruin anyone or anything to seize power and control. And typically, our villain, as I said earlier, isn't like an unknown like murderer. This is an unknown person, usually gone by some alias like Mr. Brown, for instance. And that would mean our villain in an adventure thriller would be someone who's also a traitor, someone working alongside or at least close to our protagonists in order to achieve their goal. They're sucking the protagonist in. And that makes the revolution that they're the mastermind, they're the villain, they're the killer even more tragic. It is someone who was trusted and then betrayed that trust, often working alongside the protagonist, perhaps to hinder their plans, perhaps to, send them on the wrong path. And, these adventure thrillers also tend to have a lot of accomplices, and those accomplices are probably known. You often see an adventure thriller, there's a known evil contingent, whether it's one person or multiple people or whoever. Take, like, again, the secret adversary, that like Russian fellow, whatever his name is. Like, we know he's a villain from the start, and that is often the case. We know there are certain villains at hand, and they are known villains, but we don't know who is either the mastermind controlling them, or in some cases that known villain is the mastermind, the person we know who the mastermind is from the beginning, but we don't know an accomplice. And the accomplice is sort of like the secretive person, the mole in the group. Now, for some history, I don't have any. This is a little weird. I did research this subgenre hard, and I just really like could not find anything. I mean, specifically, the issue was looking at adventure thriller mysteries. I could not locate what the first adventure thriller mystery was. The best I found, and the most like common answer I received from different sources, was Edgar Allan Poe's Murder in the Rue Morgue from 1841. I would strongly disagree that is an adventure thriller mystery. I mean, I sort of see it, but not really. But in terms of like general adventure thrillers, I mean, the Bible has stories that qualify. So there's always been adventure thrillers. And I think a reason for a lack of history is that this subgenre is both very inclusive and also very vague. Like, I think you can debate if certain adventure thrillers are really mysteries. I think you can debate if certain novels are thrillers at all. And I would use the qualifications I set out earlier. And most important, I think a thriller mystery has a figure that has to be identified and unmasked. And we still have adventure thrillers today. I mean, I would argue they've gotten a lot better in quality over time, actually. I would say this is probably a rare subgenre that has, with all the technology and world events going on, you can have adventure thrillers about anything set anywhere. Lots of techno thrillers and mecha thrillers out there, hackers and biological warfare, and all kinds of just really horrible things with incredible stakes. And, I know a lot of people, I don't mean to be like a downer here, but like the world is getting, I think, a little more dystopian. So I think there's never going to be a shortage of topics for an adventure thriller. And I think important to note here is there are a lot more good quality authors who specialize in adventure thrillers today. They always existed for sure, but in the golden age we got a lot of traditional mystery authors who would like write the occasional thriller, often of low quality. I mean, you'll notice in my ranking videos the thrillers are often below even like mediocre whodunits. Agatha Christie is someone who admitted she liked writing thrillers because she didn't have to put much effort into them as her regular mysteries. And this was true even after she got out of her exploitive contract with the Bodley Head. Marjorie Allingham switched over to mostly thrillers late in the Campion canon, which I would argue was disastrous. But she does have Traitor's Purse, which is fantastic. I couldn't imagine what it was like waiting all year for like the new Christie mystery to come out and the result being like Destination Unknown. Like, how awful would that have been? But all the big Golden Age names did this at least once or twice, usually tragic in results. We also saw a lot of sort of blending the whodunit with the adventure thriller, like in The Clocks or like in Dragon's Teeth, the result of which was almost always tragic as well. I think if you're going to do an adventure thriller, you have to go all in on it. Thrillers are dangerous in plot and in spirit, and I think the writer needs to be as well. And now for my personal thoughts, and I'm a bit mixed on adventure thrillers. I don't really enjoy them as much as pretty much all the other subgenres. I think mostly because, I started reading mysteries from the Golden Age and just reading like an Agatha Christie thriller, especially ones that didn't have Tommy and Tuppence, just like weren't as exciting as reading like a regular mystery novel, a more traditional who done it. But I do think there's a lot of good in adventure thrillers. I personally am someone who prefers adventure thrillers on the screen. I would rather watch like Indiana Jones than read an Indiana Jones novel. I don't even know if there's Indiana Jones novels. I'm sure there probably is somewhere. But again, like I much prefer watching like Alan Rickman in Reacher than I would like actually reading the Reacher novels. I don't think I've ever read a Reacher novel outside of the first one. Again, I just don't have a lot of interest in reading. I don't think the excitement and the adventure really comes off the page in the way it needs to. I think it's so much more exciting watching it on the screen and watching it in a theater with popcorn than reading it in like a cozy like book nook. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Again, I also think in terms of quality, adventure thrillers are a bit mixed. Again, mostly because I've started reading mystery novels from the Golden Age. I did not find the thrillers from like Christie or Sayers or Ellery Queen to be that interesting. They're definitely the lesser quality of their novels. And that does sort of carry over into my opinion of just regular thriller novels from thriller writers. I do think, again, as I said, I do think this subgenre is getting better today. I think they're much more creative. I think there's a lot more you can do with them. I think this is a rare subgenre where there are original plots happening. I don't find that there are often a lot of traditional mysteries that have like totally new original content today, but I do think adventure thrillers do. And I also think adventure thrillers are getting more popular. I think people want to see the hero rising, to defeat the evil. I don't think a traditional murder mystery reaches that level necessarily nowadays. I know in the age of like Sherlock Holmes, it would. People like seeing the detective straighten everything out and get society back to normal. But I do think today people are a lot more pessimistic, and I think the hero then needs to be bigger and do bigger things. And so I do like adventure thrillers. Again, it's usually not my like first choice of novel to pick up, but it probably is my first choice of like movie to go see in the theaters, maybe outside of course like a regular mystery novel. But again, they can be fun. I do think the quality varies from time to time, but again, so does everything else. So you know what, I'll take it. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think about the adventure thriller mysteries. Again, I think they're a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, they can be fun if they're good, but I think if they're bad, they're probably like really bad. But anyway, next week we are back traveling vicariously through mystery novels, and this time we are headed to a place I go on vacation a lot. That would be the Atlantic seaboard on the US East Coast. And this time we are actually on vacation with Ellery Queen and the Spanish Cape Mystery, celebrating its 90th anniversary in 2025. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.